Okay, good afternoon ladies and gents. I'm going to show you how I personally shuck an oyster. Lots of people are afraid of oysters. They think it's too hard, too tough, too tricky, and it really is dead simple. First thing to do, make sure you've got some good quality oysters. Use a good fishmonger's, use someone local if you can, so you can trace the product from the sea to your kitchen. Then once you've got your oyster, check it, make sure it's not open. If it is slightly open, give it a squeeze, make sure that the oyster itself is responding. Remember, it's a live product in your kitchen until you eat it. If the shell is open and staying open, the oyster's dead. Discard them, like with any shellfish. Then you've got to make sure your oyster is nice and clean. We don't want any grit on the outside there. A little bit of seaweed, for example, right there. Just pull it off, give it a scrub. When you're keeping the oysters, keep them at the bottom of your fridge. Don't keep them in water, keep them dry and in the bottom of the fridge, nice and chilled, and they'll be happy. They'll keep for about 3 to 4 days after you've purchased them from the fishmongers. If any doubts at all, ask the fishmonger themselves, okay? To shuck the oyster, it's very simple. You need one of these, an oyster knife. They're usually a short, stout blade, quite thick. A point but not a sharp point. That's just to get in there and lever it open. You'll have maybe a little edge on the blade again. It won't be sharp. That's just so you can bring the oyster away from the edge of the shell. Okay? Take the oyster itself. You get lots of sometimes lovely little pieces of equipment. You have a board itself which you can wedge the oyster into, so when you open it, it'll help protect the knuckle. If you can find them, brilliant. Personally, I just like a cloth. Okay? Nice thick chef's cloth here, or a tea towel will suffice. Secure your board to the worktop with a damp J cloth underneath, okay? Just secures the board, stops it moving around when you're applying the pressure. Taking your oyster, if you want to come in a bit closer there, you'll see on these ones here in particular, there's a little gap there, and that is where you're going to insert the blade. Even on this one where it's a bit closer, you'll still see that gap, okay? Now, place the oyster on the cloth, and on the top of that shell, place the other half of the cloth. Now, this is where you've got to take the risk. You're taking the point of the knife, you're inserting it into that gap, and you're gently pushing. Many people force it in, they think you have to exert a lot of pressure. You really don't. That's how accidents happen. That's how the blade will slip and it will go into your hand. You don't want that. Just a gentle pressure in. You can feel it going in, and then I just like to twist like that. And if you hear that pop, that's the oysters being popped open. Slowly lever it as you go down the length of the shell. You can see inside the flesh there of the oyster, and all you're doing is you're just levering it away, scraping the meat off the back of the shell, because oysters aren't cheap, you don't want to waste any of that, okay? And there's the lid of the shell. Inside, a little bit of shell may have come off the edge, just scrape that out, gently tease the oyster flesh off the neck of the shell, and that is the muscle that you want to take through. Just wipe the edge off there, just a little scrape, okay, and that's your oyster detached from the shell, so you can then put it into your service, right? How to present it, I've got here a little crushed ice, a wee little bowl, some crushed ice in the bowl. Doesn't matter if it's completely perfectly crushed or not. You're going to sit the oyster on top. Now obviously you'll have a bigger bowl, you maybe have half a dozen, you'll maybe have a dozen. Oysters, I can eat as many as you put in front of me. As you can probably tell, this is not, I'm not any stranger to a fish supper, okay? Classic accompaniment for oysters is some nice fresh lemon and a nice little vinaigrette made with some finely diced shallot. Shallots are nice, they've got a nice strong onion flavour. They're a pain to peel, but once you've got the skin off, you've got a lovely sweet little piece of onion there. Just gently cut down the length, and then a fine dice like that, so you get that finely chopped onion there. Into the pot with some of the shallot, and then you would normally serve a little red wine vinegar on the top of that, or white wine vinegar. This particular one we're using, it's a locally made raspberry vinegar, and I'll show you how you can make vinegars at another occasion. Just pour that in. Make sure you've got a wee teaspoon on the side so you can spoon a little on the oyster. Maybe a little bit of lemon, maybe some Tabasco or some fresh cracked pepper, and then when you have your oyster, the fun part. So I like it with a little vinegar. On it goes, making sure everything's all off. Delicious.